Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about This Is Us, Season 5, Episode 12, Both Things Can Be True. Now, at the beginning, I wasn't really feeling this one. It felt a little bit disjointed. It felt like it was going to be an overstuffed episode where they were trying to do too much. But a funny thing happened as the episode progressed. It had a lot of awesome payoffs. Tons of great scenes, including a good showcase for the character of Miguel. Some interesting pairings that we don't usually get. And Susan Kelechi Watson absolutely killing it. Watson as Beth has always been great, but this season, she's been absolutely killing it. Before going any further, I will tell you two things. One, this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you have not yet watched the episode, I highly recommend that you do so, and then come and watch my video. And two, if you like my content, please subscribe to my channel. We begin in the past timeline, where Jack is getting ready to propose to Rebecca. He's painting a sign, recreating his first date at the carnival. Miguel walks in with some candy apples and makes Jack briefly afraid that he misspelled the word carnival before telling him he's just kidding. Jack tells him that it can't just be good, it has to be perfect. Miguel points out that recreating the first date is exactly the kind of romantic gesture that makes other guys hate him. Miguel asks if he ever managed to get a hold of Rebecca's dad. And Jack tells him that eventually he just spelled it out for the secretary. Hey, can you let him know that the guy he hates is planning on proposing to his daughter and would like his blessing? Give me a call back. And never heard anything. Jack goes on to say that her dad probably thinks he's still the same drunken kid who can't hit a golf ball to save his life. Miguel points out jokingly, but you can't hit a golf ball. And credits. 1 minute and 49 seconds. Legit the shortest cold open that I have seen on This Is Us. Cut to a magazine saying that the Manny is engaged. And this actually goes back to a point I made a few episodes back in this season, that Madison would be hounded by the press at this point. The paparazzi. And we saw this, of course, in the ride, but I've gotten no other indication that Madison's life had changed. And it would be interesting to dive into exactly how this affects Madison, but so far we really haven't seen much of that. The wedding planner that they are meeting with says that their engagement is big news, and that they managed to lock down the venue that they were looking for. And Kevin says his catchphrase from the Manny say, "What?" And he says he can't control it, even though I can't remember the last time we heard him actually do that. But okay, it makes some sense since the magazine was, sitting on the table. But this is not a regular thing that we hear Kevin do anymore. Kevin somehow manages to pick up on an issue with Madison, even though she's looking perfectly happy. And she says that she's just surprised that they were able to book it so quickly. And then Madison does the Manny. And they high-five each other. These guys are just so adorable. Nikki comes out and randomly says that he's never been invited to a wedding before. He crashed one at one point, but never actually been invited. And it's amusing to me to note that Nikki is actually wearing the baby monitor in his pocket. How quickly the man has adjusted to becoming an uncle. And this answered the question of whether Nikki would be sticking around as a character, or if he would just go right back to where he was. It would make sense for him to stick around, and even, indeed, live with Madison and Kevin. which I'm going to guess in the future scenes is exactly what Nikki is doing. The wedding planner says that she is going to need a list of who is attending as soon as possible. And Kevin says it's not going to be a very big affair. Closest family and friends. The only person in Kate's wedding party, or rather Madison's wedding party, will be Kate, which is a little bit depressing. But she asked last night, they screamed, they cried. Kevin says that his best man will be Randall. And he's sure when he finally gets around to asking him that it will be equally beautiful. And Madison seems surprised by this, that he hasn't asked him yet. There's a complicated expression on Kevin's face, and he says, stuttering a little bit, that he just wants to ask Randall in the right way. The wedding planner asks about hosting of the rehearsal dinner, and that apparently is his mom and her husband Miguel. Nikki ends up chiming in. Miguel, huh? The guy that's banging my mother's wife, right? Kevin says, yeah, that would be my mom. And I think he prefers being called the husband of over a decade, but yeah, that one. And Nikki says that, he would like to help out with the rehearsal dinner, whatever the heck that is. Kevin's like, are you serious? And Nikki says, yeah, of course, any schmuck can pick out what's for dinner. And Kevin is excited. And the only reason that Nikki wants to do this, of course, is because of Miguel. We cut to Beth, who is reading the magazine about the Manny getting engaged. Randall is starting his group for transracial adoption. Beth tells him to let the others speak, even though he's a great orator and all that. And as it turns out, that won't be a problem at all. Randall's story in this one is very slight. I would say that it could have been cut and expanded upon elsewhere, except I think it's going to be relevant to the next episode. I think what we hear is going to come up. That's my theory anyway. Basically, in his group, all we see is Randall listening to the various stories of people who have been adopted by people that do not share the same race as they do. Such is Randall's situation. I'm not really going to talk any further about those scenes, so I'm going to skip over them. Not because they're bad or anything, I just don't really have anything to say. And like I said, it's very slight. But again, I think it's going to come up in the next episode. Meanwhile, Alex, Tess's significant other, I'm sorry, I can't do the whole pronoun thing. Now, actually, I think I'm going to address this now. I've said this before, and I'll say it here because it makes sense too. I don't really have a very good grasp of the whole gender pronouns thing. I have a vague understanding of it, but it's not something that I've really encountered. It's not something that I'm currently dealing with people in my life, like Beth is with her daughter. So I don't have a great deal of understanding or insight on that matter. But as it turns out, it's not really the whole point of the story. It is something that they are dealing with, but when it comes down to it, the story is not about that. Alex turns out to be the one from the video that got Tess in trouble back in the episode, I believe that was Changes. And I'm quite honestly surprised that they followed up on that. I didn't think that was going to be an ongoing story. I thought that was going to be a one-off thing. So anyway, Alex is coming over. Randall asks if she's cool with meeting Alex for the first time, and Beth seems to suggest that she is. In the process, we hear Beth practicing the whole gender pronoun thing, and Randall calls her out on that. And Beth's remark is that Tess gets really mean when you get it wrong. Beth's mom enters the scene, though she was there all along. You could see her in the background. Very blurry, but she's there. And she says that Beth could always call on her for backup because her non-binary gender game is very, very strong. We cut to Toby reading the same magazine, and I missed the fact that almost every transition up to this point is about this magazine. Toby, as his new function as a stay-at-home dad, is basically reading the magazine to his kids. Kate is about to depart for her first day on the job, and she says she's nervous. But Toby, being the ever-supportive spouse, says that she's going to absolutely kill it. It's what she was born to do. Kate thanks him for being such a trooper during the whole transition of her working and Toby not. Toby makes a crack about the forced early retirement, which Kate says is not funny. Toby has the same hit and miss joke ratio that I have. I'd almost venture to say it's slightly worse, which is hard to do. Toby says he's looking forward to spending time with their insanely cute kids until he moves on to the next thing. Kate departs, and Toby raises his hand to sing, "I Wanna Rock!" And Jack says, no. Okay, there is no way that moment was scripted. There is no way they got that kid to say no like that. Toby said his line, the kid reacted, and Toby went with it. That had to be improvised. We cut to Jack and Miguel. Jack has hung up his sign, the candy apples are done, and Miguel is suggesting that they start a side hustle, indoor carnivals. Somehow, I don't think that's going to be all that successful, especially if you're doing it out of Jack's apartment. Miguel asks, when are you going to start practicing the proposal? And Jack says, oh, no, I don't need to practice. I got it all up in here. And Miguel's like, what? You can't just propose to a girl like Rebecca without practicing first? And Jack's all like, all right, you want me to practice? Fine. And he starts rubbing his hands together and says, this is going to be like an episode of I Love Lucy. Jack, you have no idea how right you are. He starts to speak, but Miguel's like, you're going to do it standing up? Do you have the ring? So Jack goes and gets the ring. And he kneels. And he puts the ring on Miguel's finger. And he starts talking about what a horrible first date they had. And Miguel's like, is this really necessary? She doesn't need reminding of what a terrible first date you guys had. Eventually, Jack gets through it. Only, there's one slight problem. Miguel can't get the ring off his finger. Who didn't see that coming? The I Love Lucy vibe is in full effect. Miguel even points out that actually happened on I Love Lucy. We cut to Kevin in the present-day timeline, hanging out with Nikki. Madison is at the park with Toby. And Kevin says he's going to email Randall to ask him to be his best man. Really, Kevin? Email? That is not the kind of question you ask by email. And he's doing this to avoid calling Randall. That much is obvious. Alright, look, if you want to write your words down on paper so that when you actually do talk to him, you can get your words out and say what you want to say, fine. But don't write an email to the guy. Nikki is thinking like I am, and he calls Kevin out on that, saying, isn't that a little impersonal? And Kevin insists that he wants to get the words just right. Miguel enters the scene, and Kevin tells him that Nikki is excited to do wedding planning with him. That's not the word that I would use. He says to just ignore Kevin while he sits there doing absolutely nothing, trying to write an email that he shouldn't be writing, when he should really be making a phone call, but I'll get off that. Miguel says he's excited to have Nikki aboard the wedding planning. And oh boy, that's going to change real quick, Miguel. Miguel goes on to explain that the food will be a bunch of appetizers. That way, people can help themselves to as much as they want. And Nikki, under his breath, replies, "Really? Well, you're no stranger to helping yourself to whatever you want." And Miguel's like, "What was that?" "Oh, nothing, Nikki says. Nikki recommends pigs in a blanket. And Miguel recommends a bunch of things that I have never heard of. I'm actually on Nikki's side here, even though Nikki's only purpose for being is to be a pain in Miguel's butt. Nikki fends off, or rather, Kevin fends off Nikki's attempt to get him involved. "Whatever you guys think," Kevin basically says, and that's about where my position would be. Meanwhile, Kevin has gotten as far as writing, "Dear Randall." Wow, you are making a lot of progress over there. Kate arrives to work and is instantly not vibing with what I guess is her new boss. Not gonna lie, the guy seems a little bit of a prick. We cut to Beth, who asks her mother, "Do you know the difference between agender and bigender?" And okay, I did not know the difference because I know nothing about this topic, so I looked it up. Agender is defined as not having a gender. Some agender people describe it as having a lack of gender, while others describe themselves as being gender neutral. People often use the following words to mean more or less the same thing: genderless or gender-free. Bigender is defined as denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity encompasses two genders. She realized that she missed the feminine side of herself and gradually realized that she was bigender. I can't say that reading those two definitions really helped me with this topic very much, but maybe it'll help you. Anyway, her mother points out that Alex isn't going to be quizzing her on this topic, and yes, she does know the difference, being the English teacher and all. And of course being hip with the times in the way that Beth is not. I mentioned in the last episode that these two were in that it is kind of funny that Beth's mom is better adept at handling the situation or becoming adapted to it than Beth is. When Beth is the younger generation and should be more adaptable at this point. But that isn't how it always works. The doorbell rings, and in enters Alex. Alex gives Beth a quick greeting, and Beth says she made poppers. Tess is quick to say that they will eat it upstairs, and then away they go, just like that, leaving a befuddled Beth behind. Beth Mom hopes that they will leave them some poppers. Yeah, I wouldn't count on that. Skipping past Randall's scenes, because I said all that I'm going to say about those particular scenes, I will note, however, that it is the only appearance of Mandy Moore in this episode, and it's not new footage. It's from scenes that we've seen in the past. That makes it 2 episodes in a row in which Mandy Moore did not appear, which I'm sure has much to do with the fact that she had recently given birth. When we return from commercial, Miguel and Jack are trying to get the ring off Miguel's finger using butter. They hear a knock at the door. Miguel asks if it's Rebecca, and no, because Rebecca lives there, she would just walk right in. Lo and behold, it turns out to be Rebecca's dad, played by Tim Matheson. I believe this is the first time that I've done a video on this series that actually featured this actor. And I was surprised like hell to see him because I did not notice his name in the credits. I guess I just wasn't paying that much attention like I usually do. Anyway, her dad has come to say that he will do his best to be civil and to tolerate the marriage, but he cannot give his blessing. And he wanted to say that man to man. Jack just takes it. But Miguel doesn't let that slide. But we won't see that moment for a little bit. First, we go to current day Miguel, dealing with Nikki, who's being as much of a pain as he possibly can be. He mentions the fact that Miguel is going to be giving a speech. And Nikki is giving him a hard time about that. He says, well, we are co-hosting this event. And Miguel says, really? How much money are you kicking in again? This earns him a look from Kevin on the couch. Miguel sees it and starts to apologize, but says that Nikki has been shooting down everything that Miguel has suggested, and it's starting to get a little weary. Nikki says, no, it's kind of like the way you wore down my brother's wife to get him to marry you. Her to marry you, rather. This draws another look from Kevin, and Miguel looks like he's been slapped. He says, excuse me? And Kevin from the couch is like, Nikki, what the hell? Nikki says to forget it. And Miguel, who's mad as hell, and we don't see Miguel mad very often, says, nah, I don't want to just forget it. Go ahead. We're both grown men. Say what you're going to say. Nikki says, it just doesn't sit right with me. My brother cuts me out of his life, replaces me with you. You come along, swoop in, and then you marry his wife. Kevin is wisely staying out of this and just letting these two have this conversation. But he doesn't look happy. Miguel is 9 kinds of pissed and probably a little hurt. But he's restraining himself. He says, swooped in. I married Rebecca 13 years after Jack died. And if you're wondering, if I spend a few minutes every day wondering what Jack would think of that, then the answer is yes. There is only one person that I owe an explanation to, and it's a one person that I can't give it to. I certainly don't owe one to you. Miguel might as well be talking to the fans, because as I've covered before, there are plenty of people who don't exactly approve of Miguel and Rebecca's marriage, and they don't like Miguel, even though there's long since been no reason to feel that way. Hell of a scene for Miguel. He has the distinction of kicking butt in 2 different scenes in 2 different timelines. Nikki's only response is, okay. And, oh, by the way, Nikki, you absolutely deserved Miguel's anger in that moment. You deserved what you got. I'm no partisan. When a character is wrong, they're wrong. I don't care if I generally like them or not. We cut to Madison and Toby, and I don't think that we ever see these guys together. I don't recall a scene between the 2 of them. I mean, I'm sure it's existed, but I don't remember it. Toby senses a problem and says to Madison that what is said on the playground stays on the playground. And Madison eventually says that they settled on a venue. And it's beautiful, but it's not where she would like to get married. And Madison ends up asking Toby how he's adjusting to being a stay-at-home dad. And as it turns out, not quite the face that he's putting on it, the false bravado of adjusting to that life. He loves his kids. He just doesn't want to spend 10 hours a day with them. He wants to be working. He wants to be doing what he loves doing. And he thinks that saying that makes him sound like a jerk. Madison disagrees. He says that makes him an honest person. Only he won't be quite so honest later, when he probably needs to be. When it counts. Toby ends up telling Madison that she should talk to Kevin. And Toby should talk to Kate. Only one of them will actually do so. Cut to Kate, who's checking in by phone on the kids, eventually drawing the irritation of her boss. He ends up saying to her, "Hey, look, I get it. You love your kids, but if you're being separate from them means that you can't be here helping my kids, then this isn't going to work." And that's very much summed up. And while, yes, he's a bit of a prick in this scene, he definitely has a point. And I think the old Kate would have taken that and had a meltdown or maybe just left. But she ends up taking the words to heart and acting on it in what I think is a healthy way. So for me, this seems like further evidence of growth for Kate's character. Cut to Beth and her mother still sitting on the couch. In fact, in the same positions that we last saw them. Deja comes down the stairs and says, "Hey, why does Tess get to have her door closed with her significant other when me and Malik don't?" Well, Beth sees that Deja has a point. She didn't know that the door was closed. "Hello, Deja. Goodbye, Deja. We're not going to see you again for the rest of the episode." Beth feels like she should go up there and talk to Tess about this. And her mother asks her, "You didn't go over ground rules with her beforehand?" And nope, she didn't. Because she doesn't know how to handle this situation. But really, when it comes down to it, it's not any different than Deja and Malik. If you have those rules for the two of them, you should have them for Tess, no matter who she is dating. But Beth is off her game because she doesn't want to have a problem with her daughter. She doesn't know how to manage this. She honestly doesn't want her 13-year-old mad at her, even though that's what 13-year-olds do on the regular. Hell, you breathe wrong, and the 13-year-old is going to be mad at you. Beth proceeds to go up the stairs to talk to Tess, and her mother tells her, gently and quietly, to proceed lightly. She enters the room after a knock, where Alex and Tess are about to kiss. Tess is all, "What are you doing in here? I can't believe you just barged in like that." And Beth says, "I didn't barge in, I knocked." Yeah, that's barely true. You knocked, and then went right in, with barely a second to spare. I'm not saying she's right or wrong here, but that was hardly knocking. You knock, maybe you wait a little second to get a response, though Tess didn't seem to react to the knock at all, because they were about to kiss, still. But anyway, Beth says that she would like the two of them to relocate to the couch downstairs. And Tess is like, "What? Why?" And Alex says, "Hey, Tess, it's fine." Tess says, "Okay, fine." And then apologizes to Alex for her, Beth, being a psycho. Beth, of course, overhears this and goes back inside and says, "What did you just call me?" Tess apologizes, but I'm not convinced by it, and I don't think Beth is either. And Beth suggests that it's time for Alex to go because she has to deal with her rude daughter. Tess is protesting, and Alex is like, "Okay, no problem. Hey, Tess, it's cool. It's cool." And then she leaves. And Tess says, "That was mortifying." And Beth responds, "Well, maybe you should have thought of that before you called me out by name." Or something. I didn't quite catch what Beth said. But, the implication, of course, being, before you call me a psycho. And Tess responds, "Yeah, that's what you were mad about." And Beth responds, "And what is that supposed to mean?" And Tess quietly says, "Nothing." But Beth insists. And Tess says she saw the look on Beth's face when she saw Tess with them. And Beth says, "What look? I didn't give a look." "You did. You definitely gave a look. But is it any different than the reaction you might have had to walking in on Deja and Malik having a kiss? I don't know. I think that Tess is perhaps blowing that a little out of proportion. But she is a teenager, as I've covered, so it's to be expected. Beth definitely has an issue, but it's not the one that Tess thinks. We cut to Jack, Miguel, and now Rebecca's father, who notes that the ring is on Miguel's hand. And they could have easily made some kind of gay panic thing going on here, but they didn't. Thankfully, they skipped that particular beat. All Rebecca's father says is, good luck with that. And then he goes on to say what I had already said earlier, that he is not going to give Jack his blessing. And then he begins to leave, but Miguel intervenes in his second kick-ass scene of the episode. He says, that's not good enough. And he goes on a little speech about how Jack isn't the guy that you just tolerate marrying your daughter. Jack is the guy that you bless God for having in your daughter's life. Because everything is about the girl. Jack saved money so that he can get an apartment with Rebecca for the girl. Everything was for her. And her father does not end up saying that he's giving the blessing. But I think he's moved enough by the speech that he suggests they get dental floss to get the ring. Zooming past Randall's scene, we end up with Kate again, who is listening to a girl sing. The teacher stops her and criticizes her performance, saying she needs a little bit more energy. But then Kate interjects and paints a picture for the young girl to imagine what it's like to be this excited about something. And this actually ends up helping the girl perform better, thus proving Kate's worth. And taking what her boss said earlier to heart. Cut to Beth coming down the stairs, and she says to her mother, who is still reading a book, I did not tread lightly. And I'm honestly not sure how she handled herself in that scene. I don't know. I can't say what I would have done differently within that scene. But Beth seems to think she did a bad job. And her mother says, so I heard. Beth tells her that her daughter seems to think that there was an expression on her face, that she was reacting to Alex and Tess being together. And all her mother says in response, without even looking away from her book, is, Beth says she doesn't know what's wrong with her. When Beth first came out, she was totally fine. And now, and she can't even really finish the sentence, but she continues with, I think I'm having trouble letting go. And Beth's mom quietly asks, what are you letting go of? Beth's problem boils down to, Tess is her firstborn daughter. She had all these dreams of what their future together would be like. Her giving Tess advice on boys, watching her walk down the aisle. Now, the life that she thought Tess would lead is shattered. And Beth's mom takes off her glasses, which means you know she's serious. And she says, it's more than letting go. It's about adjusting. And it's a part of being a mother. Let go of what you thought would be and adjust to what is. When you left dance, I thought you would go into academics like me. I thought you would choose to stay in DC and stay close, always. That was my picture of your life. But the real picture, the woman you've actually become, just as beautiful. It took me too much time to see that. So I hope you will adjust quicker, Bethany. Time is so precious. You blink, and your daughter's grown. and you're holed up in your daughter's house trying to make up for 20 years of not adjusting. She stops talking. She puts her glasses back on, but there's a clear indication of emotion as she starts to read her book. Beth responds by cuddling up with her mother, which is both seeking comfort in her and in a way kind of telling her that she understands her history with her, and the rift is perhaps mending a little bit. What a fantastic scene between these two. Phylicia Rashad absolutely kills it, and it's not a flashy performance. It's a very quiet, understated performance, but she gets across the emotion. And Susan Kelechi Watson is absolutely just as good. We're used to seeing Beth confident. We're not used to seeing her uncertain. I wasn't thrilled with Phylicia Rashad's character in the past, but I'm definitely glad they brought her back. We cut to Kevin and Madison. Kevin has just put the babies to sleep. Madison, eventually, after some back and forth, reveals that she does not want to go get married at the villas. And Beth, Beth is not in the scene at all. It's Kevin. Kevin gets up and looks surprised, but has a smile on his face. And Madison proceeds to tell the story of the one time when she was a kid that her family felt like an actual family. And there's this place that reminds Madison of this garden, and she wants to get married there. And with no hesitation at all, Kevin says, "Yeah, fine, sounds great, let's get married there." And Madison is surprised that it's that easy. She was rewarded for communicating how she actually felt, and Kevin listened to her story with empathy. Kevin right now is the best version of himself. We cut to Beth taking another swing at talking to her daughter. She says to her, "You will not call me names. That is not how we do things in this house. But you should be able to talk to me about how you feel." Beth says, "If you saw anything on my face when I saw you and Alex together, you need to know this. It has nothing to do with my love for you. Actually, it doesn't have anything to do with you at all. You're perfect. And Alex seems perfect." Beth asks Tess if there is anything else she would like to say. And Tess says quietly, "I know you're trying." And Beth smiles. But Tess keeps going. "But I also know that you don't have to try with Annie and Deja. And okay, but Annie, she's not even a teenager yet, so we don't even know who Annie is really going to be. So that's not a real fair comparison. But this is the way that Tess feels, and that often doesn't... Feelings aren't always fair. They just are. Tess says that it makes her sad, because she doesn't think that her and her mother are ever going to be close again. And Beth denies this. She says, we will be. We're close now." But Tess does not seem convinced. And Beth just looks at her with what seems like desperation. Beth, when it comes down to it, really doesn't know how to bridge this gulf. We cut to Kate, who's talking to Toby about how she's kicking butt in class. She eventually asks if Toby's okay, and Toby lies. He says he's just tired. He doesn't tell Kate the truth, and I'm honestly not sure that now is the right time to do it. I mean, why rain on her parade? You do have to have this conversation eventually, but that doesn't mean it has to be now. But still, I get the impression that Toby is not going to do what he needs to do. And that quite honestly is why this relationship, in the long run, doesn't really work. The communication is just not always there. And they've always seemed a little bit dysfunctional as a pair. This season not so much, but in past seasons definitely. Anyway, this is a very subtle moment, but I think it spells trouble for the relationship. We cut to Nikki, who, by the way, was very, very wrong in how he treated Miguel. He calls Miguel to apologize and says that it had nothing to do with him. It was really about his own stuff. Miguel gracefully accepts the apology. And Nikki starts to say, okay, well, that's it. Sorry to bother you. But Miguel doesn't quite let him off the phone. He tells Nikki that he was not replaced. We cut to Miguel and Jack. And Miguel, without actually saying it, Jack, without actually saying it, asks Miguel to be his best man. And Miguel, of course, accepts. We cut back to the present day, where Miguel tells Nikki that they both knew what he meant, but he couldn't say it. Miguel tells him that he couldn't call Miguel his best friend, or rather his best man, because some part of him was saving that for Nikki. And Miguel says, if you wanted to, we could both do the rehearsal toast together. And Nikki says, oh no, I don't want to give a speech. I just didn't want you to. And they both laugh. Did these two just become best friends? Another fantastic little scene. We cut to Kevin, still trying to write his stupid email, and eventually, he breaks down and just calls the man. Randall picks up. He's coming back from his therapy session. And Kevin asks him. And Randall, of course, accepts. Kevin says that he was putting off the call all day. He leaves out the fact that he was going to write an email. Sorry, I'll let that go. Eventually. But he says the reason is that he didn't want Randall to stand up there with anything between the two of them. And he says that he knows that they were putting off the conversation back when the babies were born because it wasn't the time. Randall eventually cuts him off and says, hey Kev, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I don't think now is the right time to have this conversation either. I've had kind of a long day. Kevin says, I agree. I don't want to have that talk right now. In fact, I don't want to do it by the phone. I want to do it in person. Kevin says, what if I come out? What if I come see you? Randall seems to stumble over his word. Really? And Kevin says, yeah, I've already talked it over with Madison, and I have some free time, so why don't I come out and see you after the shots? And Randall says, yeah, brother, that's cool with me. And Kevin awkwardly says, all right then, I'll book a flight. They hang up, and Randall looks at the magazine of Kevin's engagement. And he says, Manny says, what? And then we cut to a bunch of people picking up the magazine. We don't initially know who these people are, but they end up being Zoe, Kevin's ex-girlfriend, from season 3. We see Cassidy in a cameo appearance from Jennifer Morrison. And we see Sophie, another small cameo. She's the last, and they linger on her a bit longer. I hope they're not planning something with that. But the creators have to know they're pouring gasoline on the fire for those who want Kevin with either Zoe, Cassidy, or Sophie. Anyway, that is the end of the episode. Next week's episode, titled Brotherly Love, looks to be about the conversation that Kevin and Randall have. And honestly, I hope the entire hour is about that. I don't even need to see a subplot or any of these other things going on. Just these two talking for an entire hour would be fantastic. So anyway, that concludes this video. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my 2 Facebook groups, the Core Production Facebook group, as well as the This Is Us discussion page. You can buy something from the Core Production store on Zazzle. You can buy me a copy, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Core Productions, signing off.